So John, we're talking to John Petcoff at Oyster Boy Restaurant on Queen Street. And John, what I want to know is, how come a nice, well-brought-up boy from Northern Ontario like you knows everything in the world there is to know about shellfish, and specifically about oysters?
Well, as far as everything to know, it's an ongoing learning.
Yeah.
But which is very exciting. I mean, oysters, I got into it sort of by chance, in the sense that back in my university days, I was working in a restaurant, and it was a seafood place, and we just started shucking oysters one day, and being low on the totem pole, that was given to me, that job, and old chef Bruce Thompson and showed me how to do it. But then very quickly after that, Toronto, the same restaurant group, opened up a restaurant now defunct called the Rosedale Oyster Bar.
Oh yeah.
Up at McPherson and Yonge.
Right.
And this was a group, I think one of the restaurateurs had been to New York and saw the oyster bar there, and oyster bar there, and thought, oh, Toronto needs this. Moved that in. A couple of guys, including myself, were moved over to that spot when it opened up. And that was kind of the beginning of my hands-on interest in oysters, and that goes back over 25 years now.
So much, huh? And isn't it true that now, being the oyster guy you are, you're in big demand for, you go places and shuck oysters for people and prepare things and lecture and how far do you go? All over North America?
Well, I've been down to the States a few times, but it's in the Toronto area, Southern Ontario primarily. I do up to Northern Ontario, to Manitoulin Island every year for an oyster party up there a couple times. But it's so interesting, Toronto is actually, I think, one of the most oyster-centric cities in the world.
Well, I was going to ask you, whether you thought that Torontonians had to be educated to love oysters, or was just the time had come?
Well, what happened was, why Toronto is becoming if not one of the best places in the world to have oysters, is that education factor. Because what happened is Toronto had the unique opportunity in the sense when we started doing oyster parties, how it all started, where we'd go out and shuck oysters, whether in pubs or in people's homes or in companies. It started out very much this across the bar thing, where we'd set up and we'd be shucking and the people talking, as opposed to the traditional method where either oysters were shucked in the kitchen and brought out by waiters, or there was some kind of big, like the traditional Montreal style party where they would simply dump a box of hundreds, thousands of oysters on tables. People would shuck their own, and it was more about singing and dancing and whatnot than, they enjoyed the oysters. But Toronto very much had that kind of oyster shucker client relationship.
Yeah.
Then the knowledge of the oyster quickly spread amongst the consumer.
Yeah.
So Toronto people are probably
knowledgeable.
Most knowledgeable. Like, I make always a big joke about, but this is true. 25 years ago, you'd put an oyster in front of somebody in Toronto. The majority of the people would look at it and say, "What is that?" They'd heard the word oyster, but actually eating them was a different thing.
Yeah.
Today, I'll go into someone's home and I'll have 12-year-old kids will come up to me and say, "What kind of oysters do you have?" And start telling me what they like. So that's been the big change. So
people come in, they come out for dinner, they come into Oyster Boy, and they sometimes know very much what they want, right?
Absolutely. Today, more and more. There's always, it's an ongoing process of educating people. We've offered for years here at Oyster Boy the Shuck You.
Excuse me, it sounds a bit rude.
Oysters have a rude side to them, though, Gary. People come in groups of 8 to 12. We lecture them on the whole history and the production of oysters in Canada, and then we make them shuck 1.5 dozen oysters.
No kidding.
They shuck and eat 1.5 dozen oysters.
See, I have it in my mind, perhaps it's incorrect, but I always think of shucking as sort of dangerous.
Well,
can't you cut your hand or something?
You can, and again, it's 100% about focus. The task is not as difficult as people imagine. The hard part is paying attention. So once you're taught properly how to do it, and if you're cajoled and forced into paying the proper amount of attention to it, it's pretty straightforward, and it's fairly easy. Almost anybody can do it, so to speak.
Don't let us know that. Keep it a mystique.
That's right. Yeah, we'd love to do that, but we don't.
How long has Oyster Boy been here?
It's our 10th year for the restaurant.
Way.
Yes,
it doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, no. Adam Calhoun and I started the business 14 years ago. And doing primarily catering, parties, and doing a little wholesale.
Yeah, but the place here where people come in and have dinner?
Been open for 10 years.
Really? It doesn't seem possible. I still think of Oyster Boy as a kind of new restaurant.
Yeah, well, we try to sustain that vibe.
Yeah.
And but no, it's been amazing. This neighborhood has changed, obviously, drastically. When we first came in here, this was an abandoned partially abandoned. It was still operating, but a little gone by the wayside greasy spoon called the New Harmony. Like so many of the restaurants along this strip catered to the factories.
Yeah.
Massey Ferguson, the chocolate factory, candy factory.
That all changed.
Yeah, and by the 70s, early 80s, that business had died out. Most of these little restaurants kept going. So we came in here, same as other people along the strip. It was very easy to come in, take over one of the leases on these old restaurants, refurbish it, and that's been part of the whole restaurant scene along Queen West.
John, make me hungry for a big platter of oysters right now. Right on. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.